Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the last day of our penultimate or second to last unit, Unit 8. This is Evolution, Day 7. So let's go ahead and get started. So we've mentioned this word species a lot. And to be very direct with you, the term species is still not fully defined by biologists. But we're talking about speciation, or the process of becoming a new species. And its relationship to evolution. So the most common definition of species is two, or rather, instead of two, let's make it a little bit more general, members of a population that can breed and have fertile offspring. And I'll give you an example. So we know there are many dog breeds, right? But they're not different dog species because all of the dog breeds have the same number of chromosomes and they can produce fertile offspring with each other, right? That's why we crossbreed, can have labradoodle, whatever the case may be. But, okay, this is why, again, this is the most common definition of species, but it's not always 100% accurate because a wolf and a dog are considered different species, but a wolf and a dog could have fertile offspring. As well, a coyote and a wolf are different species, but they could produce a fertile offspring together, a coy dog. So, for this reason, species is not always totally well defined. However, the fact that we have biodiversity, many different millions of different species on Earth of different types of animals and plants, many different species of organisms, is due to evolution. So that is really the message here. But we're going to examine what speciation is. And again, this is a little, what is the definition of a species? You can use my definition that I gave you, but please feel free to do a little internet research because you'll see this isn't a cut and dry question. So, okay. First question, explain why comparing the vein patterns of several leaves. So this is like anatomical evidence. And we will actually be doing this in our lab tomorrow, is a less reliable means of determining evolutionary relationships between two plants than using gel electrophoresis. So gel electrophoresis is giving us molecular evidence DNA evidence. Of an evolutionary relationship, and this is the most accurate. So we can use all of these other different means to examine evolutionary relationships between organisms, but the most accurate data we can get is through direct DNA comparison. And you will see that in the Relationships and Biodiversity Lab, when we will use many different tests to determine which two species are most closely related. So, okay, this part here is for you to hypothesize. So I'm not going to answer these questions for you, but you want to answer them, but feel free to hypothesize. Guess. We don't do enough of this during Zoom school. You get all of the answers, but here you're going to hypothesize. We've been studying evolution for a bit, so you have some information. What is the definition of a species? And what factors allow for organisms to become distinct species? For instance, think birds. So, factors maybe different environments. Select for different traits. Or niches, you can't read that, but it says niches, not nieces. All right, now just like with yesterday's work here, you're going to click this link and watch this video. Ooh, I can't play it or I'll get a copyright strike. But what you're going to do is you're going to click that link, watch that video about anoles, which are a type of lizards that are really common in Florida where I grew up and are also common in the Caribbean. And then go ahead and come back to this video and we'll go through the questions. So there's a little anole. So cute. Flapping its little reproductive flap, telling the ladies it's ready to party. And the question asks, how does one species split and multiply into many? So how does speciation happen? So different environments or different niches, in particular in this video of anoles. Sorry, I thought it was going to pop up on here. Again, first day new technology, clearly that's me. But okay, so the anoles found different ecological niches in their habitat. Some of the anoles were on the ground, some of them were in the tree limbs, and some of them were in the canopy. So as a result, their environments selected for different traits. And then over time, living in those new environments, occupying those new ecological niches, eating different foods, they became different species. As the environment that they were in selected for different traits. So even though they might live in the same area, they occupy different spaces within that area. And we'll talk more about ecological niches when we get to Unit 9, Ecology. All right, Part C, Individual Speciation Practice. Several thousand years ago, a flock of migrating hawks was driven from its normal route by a severe storm. The birds ended up on two different islands, as shown on the map. The environment of Island A is mostly rocks and cliffs, like the original nesting ground. The environment of Island B is a dense forest. The hawks have survived on these islands to the present day with no migration between the two populations. When put together, the hawks can no longer breed. Okay, so they used to live together and then they moved to two different islands. When put together, they can no longer breed. And there's a little note on there. A student can do their bird noises. So let me just do mine. Caw-caw! But okay, how does this demonstrate speciation using the terms barrier, isolation, and environment? We're actually going to define these terms in a second, but so several thousand years ago, a flock of migrating hawks was driven from its normal route by a severe storm. So there was a disruption. The birds ended up on two different islands. We can see here Island A and Island B. The environment of Island A is mostly rocks and cliffs, like the original nesting area. So Island A, pretty similar to the original area. But the environment of Island B is a dense forest. So now we have a very different environment. Wow. Sorry, guys. Oh, man. There's a different environment in Island B. Guys, I feel like it looks nice when I do this with the slides, but I keep messing up. Okay, there's a different environment in Island B, different from where they lived originally. So there is a barrier to the two different groups of hawks seeing each other again because there is this gap between they're on two different islands. They have been isolated from each other, living on two different islands, isolated from the original population. And there is a different environment on island B. So, due to the severe storm, hawks migrated to 2 different islands. Sometimes even winds can blow a group of birds to a different place as they're flying in the air. The ocean, acting as barrier, kept the hawks isolated on 2 different islands, so they were separate. Since the environment on island B is different than the mainland and the island A environment, the hawks on island B will change. Oh, bother. Will change due to natural selection, and only fit traits for that environment will be selected for. Only traits fit for that new environment on island B, which is a dense forest, and it's not all rocks and cliffs like the other 2 environments. Over time, they will evolve into different species and will be unable to interbreed, which is what happened in our example. When the hawks were put together again, they could no longer breed. This is very similar to the most famous example of evolution, which happened with finches on the Galapagos Islands. And we're actually going to do a lab talking about those finches at the end of Unit 8. So this last part is all notes on your paper. So let's go through some terms that we talked about, and now we're going to define them specifically. So we have speciation, which is the formation of new species. As species evolve, they become reproductively isolated, which means members of 2 populations cannot interbreed and produce fertile offspring, right? So reproductive isolation, which would not allow the 2 hawks, for example, when they are brought back together, to interbreed. And this can happen over time, but as we discussed, this isn't super cut and dry because we have like wolves and coyotes. They became 2 different species because they do have a common evolutionary ancestor far back, but they could still interbreed and produce fertile offspring. So this is why this is very interesting for evolutionary biologists to study, still even to this day. And as we have better technology now to examine the genetic information, the genetic relationship between these species by looking at DNA sequences, we can get a better clue into the evolutionary history behind wolves and coyotes and how they became 2 different species, but why they still maintain that ability to breed with each other. It's important to understand, but I digress. Geographic isolation. So when organisms are separated by geographic barriers, like rivers, mountains, or bodies of water, sometimes things can happen on Earth, the geological things can happen, like a volcano. And a volcano might happen, or an earthquake might happen, and this might cause 2 groups of organisms that might have been part of the same population, like 1 species of rabbits, let's say, and there's an earthquake, and now there's a big fault line separating this group of rabbits that all used to live together. Over time, those rabbits winding up on 2 different sides of this fault line could become 2 totally different species of rabbits because they have geographic isolation. They can't see each other to interbreed, and their environments may be different. Or the predators that are found in those environments may be different, and so different traits will be selected for by those environments. Ecological isolation means species occur in the same area, but they occupy different habitats and rarely encounter each other. So this was part of what was going on in that Anoles video. So all the organisms, for example, might live in the rainforest, but some of them live low down on the forest floor and other ones live up in the canopy. So they have ecological isolation. They occupy different niches. Or we have temporal isolation. So this is species that, species that reproduce in different times of day. So this is like we said in an example that we went through that there was a mutation in one of the mice, or not mice, excuse me, in some worms. And those worms became nocturnal. And the predators that were out hunting the worms were diurnal. They were out in the daytime. So the mutation to make the worms nocturnal actually wound up becoming an adaptation, because now those worms, they could go out and feed at night and they're not going to get eaten by predators. So temporal isolation is just time, isolation by time or season. So, all right, today we talked all about speciation. This was the last day of evolution. We will talk more about different species and biodiversity in Unit 9 ecology, but we are almost done with the whole year, guys. Can you feel it? Living environment for the win. Woo woo. All right, have a super fantastic day. See you guys all soon on Zoom. Bye, guys.